Welcome back to the Authentic Christian Podcast. I'm Aaron. This is Tucker. This is Scott. And this is obviously the Campfire Stories edition, where we've been doing 10 special episodes, each one focusing on one of these short videos from the Campfire Stories. So episode 1 of Campfire Stories was Camping Out on Earth, and that's what episode 1 of this podcast was on. So now we're up to episode 8, and the title of this one was called The Torches Are Coming. This is one where we're basically trying to put ourselves in the perspective, in the place of what it would have been like 2,000 years ago to be in the Garden of Gethsemane, where Jesus was with his disciples, the night he was arrested. Mm-hmm. And he's praying, and he wakes up his disciples because they keep falling asleep. And then all of a sudden he turns and he looks up towards the gates of the Jerusalem, the outer wall of the Jerusalem, city of Jerusalem. And he sees this mob of people coming with torches, like John chapter 18 says. And what would you do if they were coming for you? Because John 18 says that Jesus knew all the things that were about to happen to him. So that's kind of what that episode was about. So in a sense, what I want to do in this episode is just go through the different gospels, look at some of the different accounts. Because, for instance, if someone's watching, the one thing we would encourage you to do is to study the accounts for yourself. We want you to not just listen to what we say, but maybe something we say will make you think, oh, that's cool. Like, I need to go look into that more. And so Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John all have information about that. So in this episode, we're just going to like go through and instead of trying to say, like, do it chronologically and hop back and forth, like, okay, go to Matthew, go to John, go to Luke, go to 13, John 13. I'd rather just go through Matthew, go to the end of the book, look through some of those accounts, and then from there go to Mark, the end, because each one of them brings out some just different facts that you won't see in others. And then a really good exercise would be for anybody watching to make a little timeline yourself at home and write down. I remember the first time I did that on a big dry erase board. It was cool because it helps you connect things that you've never connected before. So how's that sound for you guys?
That sounds pretty good.
Sounds great, man. I'm looking forward to it.
Okay. Yeah. I was going to say, the one thing we try to do, I guess, behind the scenes with this is to recreate kind of the sounds and the visual, what it'd be like in the Garden of Gethsemane.
Yeah, as much as we, just from some of the clues Scripture gives, there might be, a sound. Like, as we go through the accounts, we can, you can say, well, we tried to use this sound here, but just trying as much as we can to like set the mood. Because sometimes we just read over a section of Scripture and we're like, oh, it was night. He got arrested. Okay.
Yeah, I think in the video you try to give some of the effect of like soldiers walking or something.
Yeah, like armor clanking. And
something like you can hear their equipment.
Yeah,
if you try to imagine.
Yeah.
Try to take you back there.
Go to Matthew 26. I mean, let's just start there, I guess. And like I said, we're not going to piece this together too much. We're just going to go through each account, and if you want to piece it together afterwards, that's a really good study you can do. So, in Matthew chapter 26 and verse 26 is where Jesus institutes the Lord's Supper, all right? When he institutes the Lord's Supper, it's in the celebration of the Passover meal, right? Mm-hmm. And basically after he completes the Passover meal, he institutes the Lord's Supper. And this is something that when you go into the book of Acts, you see, and then 1 Corinthians, you see that the church partook of this on the first day of every week. 1 Corinthians 16, 1 and 2 says, as I directed the churches of Galatia, I also tell you on the first day of every week, you're supposed to take a collection, right? So there'll be no collections when I come. Earlier, so you know they're meeting on the first day of every week. 1 Corinthians 16, 1 and 2. 1 Corinthians 11 talks about when you come together in one place, partake of the Lord's Supper, right? Mm-hmm. So you can see that Acts 26 and 7, they did it when they were gathered together on the first day of the week. That's really not our topic, but that sort of plays in because at this last night, when they're eating the Passover, they're instituting the Lord's Supper. This is right before Jesus says a lot of really important things to them. And it's actually the Thursday night, and he's going to be crucified the next Friday morning, right? So some of the things that happen, if you look, this is when in verse 31, Jesus predicts that Peter is going to deny him, all right? And then he says, basically, all of you will be made to stumble because of me this night. For it is written, I will strike the shepherd, and the sheep of the flock will be scattered. But after I've been raised, I will go before you to Galilee. So this is something you see after the resurrection. Jesus already told them after he is raised. Jesus already knows he's going to die, and he's going to meet you in Galilee. The striking the shepherd and the sheep being scattered, that's obviously a Zechariah 13:7 quote, but it's referencing how they're going to all abandon him, right? So it's not like Jesus, it's not like any of the stuff came upon Jesus, like he wasn't aware of it, right? So he predicts the denial of Peter, right? And this is when Peter says, Lord, I won't deny you. And Jesus says what? Verse 34.
You're going to, what, 3 times?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I say to you, this night, before the rooster crows, you'll deny me 3 times, right? So then Peter said, even if I have to die with you, I will not deny you. What's kind of interesting, because whenever they come to arrest Jesus, who's the one that pulls the sword?
Peter.
Peter's like, I'll die with you. And then the Lord says, put your sword back in his sheath, and heals his ear. And I think Peter's maybe confused. Like, wait, what? You said I was going to deny you. And I said, I won't deny you. I even tried to fight for you. And then basically Jesus says, no, not this way. And so instead of saying, trusting, of course, I don't know what I'd have done in that situation. I'm trying not to be too hard on these guys. You know, it's easy for us to 2,000 years later say, well, I can't believe Peter did that. But it's a lot different when it's happened to them in the moment. So even if I have to die with you, I will not deny you. Right now, then it goes to verse 36 in Matthew's account. Then Jesus came to a place called Gethsemane and said to the disciples, sit here while I go over and pray. If we make it in 28 minutes to John 13, you get a whole lot more information about what happened at that Last Supper. Jesus washed their feet. Jesus had a really extensive conversation about Jesus saying, whenever I leave, I'm going to send the Holy Spirit. He's going to guide you into all truth, inspiration to the apostles, etc. So all of that, the prayer for unity, all that's going to happen in John's account, but we don't get it in Matthew. All right, so verse 36, they went to Gethsemane, and he said, sit here while I go and pray. And what happens? He takes with him, verse 37, Peter and the 2 sons of Zebedee, which are James and John, right? And he began to be sorrowful and deeply distressed. I think Hebrews even says with like extreme crying and groanings. You know where that is in Hebrews?
I don't.
Hebrews 5.
I can try to look it up while you talk.
Yeah, if you want to, go for it. I don't mean to give you a task while you're like over here looking, and I think it's Hebrews 5 maybe. Then he said to them, my soul is exceedingly sorrowful, even to death. Stay here and watch with me. He went a little farther and fell on his face and prayed, saying, Father, if it's possible, let this cup pass from me. Nevertheless, not as I will, but as you will. John 6:38 talked about how Jesus came to do the will of the Father. So even in this moment, do you think he wanted? I mean, he knew he had to fulfill the plan, but he knows what's going to happen. It's going to be awful.
I wrote down some notes from before, like in that exact moment, like the weight of what's ahead for him weighs on Jesus, but he knows that it has to happen because it's God's will. Yeah. But I mean, he's saying like if it's possible, don't please. Like, I mean, I'm sure he felt like scared, sad because he knows but he knew that he was going to carry it through because he wanted to keep the Father's will.
Yeah. Yeah, just the weight of that alone. I mean, think about the understanding that he had being God, knowing what was going to happen before he ever even came to earth. But then the reality of it, I guess, experiencing it, going through it firsthand.
Yeah.
I mean, it has to say something to how painful and humiliating it was.
Yeah.
That God, who else could have the determination, the endurance needed to go through that than God, and then for him to go and know that it's about to happen and still wish there was another way, right?
Yeah.
Pray for another way. I mean, that has to say something to how extreme it was.
Yeah. How awful it was that even God, knowing the weight, everything that weighed on that decision to save mankind, and he still is like, is there any other way? Because this is going to be awful.
Everything that weighed on it. And everything that he would understand about, human anatomy, even like about the human experience, about what life is and what pain is. I mean, he had part in creating that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And knowing what's waiting afterward.
Yeah.
Knowing the end of everything.
Yeah.
And still to have that sense of dread, that has to be something that's beyond anything that anyone else that I know now or today could try to look at and anticipate and really appreciate. I mean, I suppose other people were crucified at that time and went through some things similar, but I think there was more to it than just the physical aspect, right? I mean, he was spit on and slapped and put down by his people.
Yep.
his special
to
people.
save.
I mean, everybody's his people, but specifically
the Jews were supposed to be the ones. Yeah.
Right? They were supposed to be the arbiters of truth. They were supposed to be the ones who were teaching people, setting the example. When he said, when he talked about your light and setting it so that people could see it, when he talked about it being a city on a hill, he wasn't talking to Christians. He was talking to Jews. I mean, the principles and the lessons apply for us, but that's who he was talking to. Those people should have known. And all the things he had done for them, I suppose there's probably a deep sorrow and pain emotionally in that situation, just as much as physically.
Mm-hmm. Did you find it? Oh, go ahead. Sorry,
I didn't. And
it's Hebrews 5:7-9.
And then when we talk about this scene, oftentimes we talk about, well, I don't remember the medical term for it, but the idea of him sweating blood.
Hematidrosis.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's
a medical condition,
right? Yeah. That's an extreme. That's it. We remember that. We just had that sermon recently at church.
Yeah.
Robert this past week talked about the crucifixion.
Yeah.
The things that he went through.
Yeah.
And to be able to think about that and appreciate that and remember that each week, I think it's important for us. You go ahead if you know.
So I had it written in my Bible. I should have just guessed that I'd have it written. Where it talks about exceedingly sorrowful. Hebrews 5:7-9 says, basically offered up, I think, prayers. I don't have that part written. With strong crying, with tears, vehement cries. I mean, it wasn't like this little. I mean, it was awful. And he's trying to get the cup to pass from him. And you're exactly right. He knows the anatomy. He knows what he's about to go through. I mean, it's just hard to fathom. I mean, knowing that there's no other way.
I mean, he knew that he would make it through it. He would come out on the other end.
Yeah, he just said, whenever I'm raised, meet me in Galilee.
But I guess it's that he just didn't, he was scared to go through the pain and the humiliation.
Yeah.
The really human side of, he knew, I mean, the God side, he knew he was going to make it through it.
Yeah.
He'd be raised from the dead. But the human side of, oh man, what am I about to go through?
Yeah.
And these people that I've helped make and create.
They do this to me.
Yeah. I mean, people talk about the drama of it and how dramatic and how painful and how awful that death sentence was.
Mm-hmm.
How bad it was to be crucified. Well, it has to be terrible.
Yeah.
If you literally have God sweating blood and anxiety over what's about to happen to him.
Yeah.
That's an awful punishment.
Yeah.
So anyway.
No, you're right, man. I mean, so he prays. The disciples are asleep. He's like, can you guys not wait 1 hour? He's going through this extreme anxiety. Here's a fire. Let's say that he's, I don't know how much further he is. If you go look on a map, Garden of Gethsemane, you can look on a map and see how big it is. But he's probably just a little ways from him and they can't stay awake. And he knows this awful, what he's about to go through, and they can't stay awake. It's like the people who are supposed to be his best friends aren't there for him,
Yeah.
And so when you get, he basically prays a third time. He comes back and they're still sleeping and resting. He says, the hour is at hand. The Son of Man is betrayed into the hands of sinners. Rise, let us be going. See, my betrayer is at hand. This is really right with John 18, where the torches are coming. Look at verse 47. While he was still speaking, behold, Judas, one of the 12, with a great multitude, with swords, John 18 adds in torches, all right, but that's not in Matthew's account, and clubs, came from the chief priests and the elders. So you have this mob. John 18:3 says that Judas received a detachment of troops and officers from the chief priests and the Pharisees. Of course, they're coming to arrest Jesus. Judas says, whoever I kiss, that's the one, right? He went up to Jesus and said, greetings, Rabbi, means teacher. And Jesus said to him, friend, why have you come? I think Jesus knew already.
Yeah.
Of course he knew. Why have you come? They came and laid hands on Jesus and took him. And suddenly one of those who were with Jesus stretched out his hand, drew his sword, struck the servant of the high priest, and cut off his ear. Who's that?
It's Peter.
Peter. Yeah. Most people think, not most people, I can't make an overgeneralization like that. A lot of people that I've read believe that Peter's name isn't mentioned here because this was an early gospel, and it's possible that I don't know. They didn't want his name to be out there. I don't know if it's true or not, but I don't think it would be that hard to find out. But you have the Gospel of John, which people will think was written later, that mentions, I think John mentions
perhaps
Peter.
They failed to mention his name to spare him.
Possibly. I think John is maybe, I guess we'll find out in a minute, but I think John is where his name is mentioned, but which is written later. Okay.
I'm pretty sure.
It is? Okay. All right.
Pretty sure.
All right. But Jesus said to him, put your sword in its place, for all who take the sword will perish by the sword. Or do you not think now that I can pray to my Father and he will provide me with more than 12 legions of angels? Right? That John 10:17, Jesus said, no one takes my life. I lay it down. You're not taking the life from the commander of the army, the Lord's army.
Right.
You're not from Revelation 19, the man on the lamb on a white horse, robe dipped in blood with a sword. You're not taking his life from him. He's, guess what? He's laying it down.
Yeah.
No one's taking anything from Jesus.
He's letting that happen.
He's letting it happen. No. Whenever they bound him, he's like, in his head, he's thinking, you guys have no idea what I could do. Like Samson. When they would bind Samson, and what he would do, he'd rip the cords and like slay him, right? Jesus is so much more powerful than Samson ever was, and yet Jesus doesn't rip the cords. He basically does what Samson would have never done, So that's the passage we talked about in a few episodes again, the Chariots of Fire, 2 Kings 19, right? That's that scene where one angel killed 185,000 people. I won't do the math again because we've done it like 3 times on it. In that hour, Jesus said to the multitudes, have you come out against me as a robber with swords and clubs to take me? I sat daily with you teaching in the temple and you did not seize me. But all this was done that the scriptures of the prophets might be fulfilled. Then all the disciples what?
Left and fled.
Forsook him. They left him and fled. Chapter 20, the rest of the chapter 26, 57 through the end of the chapter, we covered that in episode 27 of the podcast on the gospel. But basically, he goes to the Sanhedrin, all right? And they just some highlights, 59. They sought false testimony against Jesus to put him to death. False witnesses. Go down to verse 67. They spat in his face and beat him. Others struck him with the palm of their hands, saying, prophesy to us, Christ, who is the one that struck you. Do you feel, personal question, do you feel worthy for Jesus to go through all this for you?
No,
I don't.
No,
I read this and I'm like,
all the time.
I think, like, why? Why do you, why would you go through this I know it's for all men, but individually, why would he go through it for me? I don't deserve it,
Yeah, every time I do something I know isn't right, I have a thought, I'm like, man, I got to repent of that.
Yeah.
Like, I let anger take hold, and anger turns to malice or something in the mind. That's something that I struggle with. Like, it's easy for me to be offended, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I know that, and I fight that, and I've done a pretty good job of keeping that under control. But every time that I sense that in my heart, I think about this. I think about that fact. I ask myself that question. I know I don't deserve it.
Yeah.
I know nobody deserves it.
That's right.
And that's the only thing that helps me to make it through, is the fact that I know no one deserves it. And it's not that I'm glad no one deserves it, but it's just that, well, at least I know I'm not the only one.
Yeah.
At least that says something, that proves something to, these feelings of, do I deserve this? They're true. I don't deserve it, but that's not the point.
Mm-hmm.
It was never about me or anyone else deserving it. It was about God's love. It's I don't know. How do you describe that?
Well, I'm setting up something.
Yeah.
Because what happens in the next chapter? Peter denies him. He's handed over to Pilate, and we could go through all this, but he's handed over to Pilate. He faces Pilate. Luke talks about how Pilate basically found him not guilty multiple times. Herod found him not guilty. And then you look down, and who is the person that deserved it? Look at verse 15. Now at the feast, the governor was accustomed to releasing the multitude one prisoner whom they wished. And at the time, they had a notorious prisoner called who? Barabbas. Son of Abba, the Father, son of the Father, right? Not God the Father, but who's the God of this world? John 8, basically, you're the sons of your father, the devil.
Yeah.
You have a guy Barabbas, who deserves it. Did he not deserve it?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, he's a criminal, right? He deserved probably death. And yet, whom do you want me to release to you, Barabbas or Jesus? They knew he had handed over because of envy. And so basically his wife says, hey, don't have anything to do with that man. But in essence, the people chant for Barabbas, and the children in verse 25 of Israel, his blood be upon us and on our children. He released Barabbas, and then scourged Jesus and delivered him to be crucified. So like the one who deserved it, Barabbas, is the one that what? Gets released.
He escapes the punishment.
Now we may not want to say, well, that's Barabbas. I mean, he was a criminal. I mean, I'm not a criminal. It's like before God, you know what sin makes you?
A criminal.
Criminal.
Yeah.
I mean, we're Barabbas. We get Jesus took our place.
That's right.
Sin is lawlessness.
That's right. Sin. That's right. 1 John 3:4. Sin is lawlessness.
But we have that hope. We got that hope from what he went through and what he did for us, and still continues to do. Like we got that hope.
Yeah. I mean, we were hopeless.
Yeah.
While we were without hope, Christ died for the ungodly. Romans 5:8-9. While we were yet sinners, Christ died for the ungodly. We were like Barabbas. And Jesus stepped in and took our place, every single one of us, when he died on that cross. He paid for those sins that we really deserve to die for, you know?
Yeah.
So it's like when you read Barabbas, like, I mean, if you wanted, you could write me over top of Barabbas, you know? Like you could write me.
That's good. Yeah.
Like
it's a good representation.
Yeah. And whenever we sin, we act like the devil. You know, he was the liar and father of lies. You know, he sinned from the beginning. He was a liar from the beginning. So anyway, the soldiers, after Barabbas is released, they scourge Jesus, which I have a note in my Bible. All right, let me read this. Scourging, a three-pronged, plated, means like braided, plated leather whip with bone and metal balls and hooks. The person would be stripped naked and tied over a pedestal. They'd tie your arms like this so your back muscles were and your skin was tight so they could really rip into it. Whipped from back to lower legs, the muscles were shredded until sometimes the backbones and even the spinal column was exposed. Kittle, who's a writer, says that these were sometimes fatal, and a lot of men bit their tongues in two. But, you know, there was one goal of scourging. You know what that one goal was?
What's that?
Don't kill them yet.
Yeah.
Even though sometimes men died, the goal for the Romans was to get them as close to death as possible without killing them, because they weren't done torturing you, and they still had to subject you to the shame of the cross.
I was thinking, like, I wonder if the thorns in his, like, on the crown, if it ever, like, affected his brain or anything, if they were, like, in his head.
I mean, if you look at Mark 15:19, okay, well, actually, look right here. Matthew 27:28. They stripped him and put a scarlet robe on him. Then they twisted a crown of thorns, put it on his head, and a reed in his right hand. They bowed the knee before him and mocked him. All right. Verse 30. They spat on him. They took the reed they'd had in his hand. They took it, and now what did they strike him with?
On the head.
On the head. I think sometimes we think that they just put that crown on Jesus' head and pressed it down, and then maybe that was it. No, the crown is in these 2-inch, whatever long thorns are in his head, and they're doing what? Striking it.
Yeah, they're pounding it in.
Yeah. I mean, and it's not, I mean, if it's long enough to swing like that, it's not little. I mean, it's like a stick.
Yeah.
And so they're basically driving those nails into his head, into his scalp, and he just sits there and takes it. You're lucky that wasn't me with that power, because I'm not God. You know what I'd do?
Yeah,
I'd kill everybody.
It had to be like all of this, like while he was going through that in the garden, like crying and weeping, and because of this, I mean, I would have.
Yeah. He knew, and that, like you said too, shameful. It's not just painful, but shameful. I mean, to be the creator and you're being subjected to this by your creation, you know, it's like if somebody, it's a bad analogy, but if someone that like has no right to scolds you, part of you is like, who do you think you're talking to? And Jesus is being scolded and assaulted and spit on by his creation. Man.
Yeah.
And then after that, when they had mocked him, they took the robe off him. So that purple robe, they took it back off. It's just a joke. Give me it back. Put his own clothes on him and led him away to be crucified. There's more details in John chapter 19. Obviously, we're not going to get through all 4 accounts. But let's just, I guess, stay in Matthew. As they came out, they found a man of Cyrene, Simon by name, compelled him to bear his cross. When they had come to the place called Golgotha, that is to say, place of the skull, they gave him sour wine mingled with gall, or bitter herbs, I think maybe some versions say. When he tasted it, he would not drink. Then they crucified him and divided his garments, casting lots, that it might be fulfilled which was spoken by the prophet. They divided my garments among them, and for my clothing they cast lots. Sitting down, they kept watch over him, and they put up over his head the accusation written against him. This is Jesus, King of the Jews. Go to verse 45. Now from the 6th hour, that'd be noon, until the 9th hour, 3 p.m., there was darkness over all the land. And the 9th hour, Jesus cried out with a loud voice, saying, Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani. That is, my God, why have you forsaken me? Verse 50, and Jesus cried out again with a loud voice and yielded up his spirit. And behold, the veil of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom, and the earth quaked, and the rocks were split, and the graves were opened, and many bodies of the saints who had fallen asleep were raised. And coming out of the graves after his resurrection, they went into the holy city and appeared to many. So when the centurion and those with him who were guarding Jesus saw the earthquake and the things that had happened, they feared greatly, saying, truly, this was the Son of God. We know that Jesus is buried in a tomb. We know that's not where it ends, though.
No.
He resurrects. But the purpose of this episode of the podcast is, if you knew all that stuff was about to happen to you, right? And that doesn't even mention what John 18 covers, which is he's taken first to Annas, who's the old high priest, but then after that he's taken to Caiaphas, who's the new high priest. And then he's taken to Luke 23, Pilate. Mm-hmm. Then he's pronounced not guilty by Pilate, but sent to Herod. Pronounced not guilty by Herod, sent back to Pilate. He knows all that's going to happen before that those torches come down the hill to arrest him. What would you do? You know what I'd do? I would run like I was being chased. Yeah. Like, and I would run over that hill, which I think I said in the podcast, over the hill was where Bethany was. It's where Lazarus was, Mary, Martha. That might be my first stop. Mm-hmm. But I mean, do I think that I would be man enough, like Jesus was, to sit there and see those torches coming, knowing I'm going to be scourged, spit on, mocked, crown of thorns driven into my head, nails driven through
I've been
your ankle?
I've been too weak. Like I said, feeling slighted when it's unjust, it'll make you want to hate people. Mm-hmm. It'll make you want to hurt people. Mm-hmm. And make you want to call those 12 legions of angels.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
That's what it would, and it wouldn't have been wrong.
Yeah. No.
I mean, not in the sense of unjust.
It would have been just.
Yeah.
God would have been just in wiping out everybody.
In this episode, I was trying to create it to set the mood. We put a thunderstorm in the background, kind of just to set the theme. And the visuals in it don't even come close to ever even matching the real thing. But I think it all built up to the idea of what you said at the end. Like, this is what Jesus did for you. Like, what are you going to do for him?
Yeah. He went through all that. And what does he want you to do? Follow him? Mm-hmm. You are likely never, I don't care what country you live in, you are likely, even if you live in, one of the most dangerous countries where you are getting physically persecuted for your faith, I can almost promise you're never going to go through what he went through. Mm. You might, what's worst case when you get shot? Maybe you get tortured a little bit, not to the extent that all the things he went through. I may have read this when we did episode 27 of the podcast because I have it written in my Bible. But with regards to crucifixion, I have this. In 1968, archaeologist Vasilio Tazaveras discovered a first century tomb. Inside was a young man estimated to be 24 to 28 years old. He'd been crucified. A large nail that was 16 centimeters long, like a railroad tie. Robert Jeffrey's a preacher at South Haven Church of Christ, he did a sermon on Sunday morning, maybe, on the crucifixion, and he had a railroad tie, and he showed that. The bones in the arm were scratched above the wrist, but the 16 centimeter long nail still held the man's ankle bones together. That's what crucifixion was, and that's what Jesus Christ went through for you. What will you do for him? Yeah. Thanks for watching this episode of the podcast. We'll see you back next time on the next episode of the Authentic Christian Podcast, Campfire Stories edition. Have a good day.